This is the technological singularity explained and promoted. So the idea is that I'm going to give you Marcus Hutter's presentation, which I've also sent you his audio, so you can, if you want, watch him giving the same presentation. The color on the slides is a little bit different. Okay, the objective is to understand one should not fear complexity, do not seek the one great truth. There are many truths and they can all be true concurrently. Understand the three main schools of belief about the singularity, understand the four main paths to the singularity, and understand the history of the singularity, Marcus Hutter's main ideas about it. So as I pointed out last time, he sort of marches to the beat of a different drummer from all other AI researchers, and so, but seems to have some answers to things like what the singularity will sound like that no one else has. Understanding the challenge of promoting the singularity and the ideas of this course, and the idea behind Future Day and Longevity Day. So one should not fear complexity. There's beauty in complexity. Your significant other is probably complex. The real world is complex, perfect, so quadruple thinking with equipoise, Canadian thing. You may know that the word equipoise, I think, is not used outside of Canada. In ethical discussions, we talk about it all the time, but if you go to any other country, that word isn't there. So Canada has its own sort of take on ethics. So you remember the idea of doublethink is holding two conflicting ideas in your mind and accepting them both, right? So you have to seemingly do that, so it's not really either or. The contradictory things can both be true at the same time. For instance, the future of transplantation, which is kind of my field, you would think that it would be one thing, like the future would be tolerance, like immune tolerance, having the body be tolerant of foreign cells, or it would be regenerative medicine, or it would be better recruitment of donors, and you can go on and on about all the various things, but it turns out that it's really an amalgam, a combination of all those things. So it's not just saying, well, what's important here? Everything, it turns out, is somewhat important. So tolerance, tissue engineering, repair, stem cell generation. And Peter Diamandis, the Chancellor of Singularity University, says, when faced with the choice between two desirable goals, choose both. That's not always possible, but maybe sometimes it is. So in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, I was trying to kind of find a metaphor that's familiar to most people, not too culturally bound. A world is confronted that's much more organic than expected. For instance, in the croquet game, the main difficulty Alice had was in managing her flamingo. So the mallet was alive and the ball was alive and everything was biological. Things you didn't expect to be biological were biological. We face a world exactly the opposite of that, where things that you were hoping would depend on biology or be working on behalf of biology maybe don't need us. The technological singularity will face a world that is less organic than expected and could develop without us. So the three main schools of belief about the singularity: accelerating change, event horizon, and intelligence explosion. So Marcus Hutter is particularly talking about the idea of intelligence exploding and whether that can happen. And then there are four main paths to the singularity: create an artificial intelligence that exceeds human intelligence, build human-computer interfaces that allow humans to go beyond their innate intelligence to a significant extent, cybernetic singularity, or find ways in biology to improve upon natural human intellect. That's probably slowest and hardest, but maybe more satisfying. And finally, it's sort of where the internet comes alive, build large computer networks in which beyond human intelligence emerges. One day, you open up the internet and it begins talking to you, and you realize it knows way more about you than you do. So, all these different variations of belief in the singularity are reflected in the courses at Singularity University, and I enjoyed my 10 days there very much in 2010. You might say this course came out of that, and how is that possible? Because most 10-day experiences you have, they rapidly leave you after that. Like there's a little blip in your well-being and knowledge at the end of the course, and then it all sort of mostly disappears and you're left with a small memory trace of whatever you did during those 10 days. I think what it was getting to know this network of people, and the network continues to grow because those people know other people and so on. So that was kind of what it was like, and it has continued to benefit me since then. And I'm very different from all the other people who took that course and all the other people who go there. There are very few full-time academics going there. So Jonathan White, surgeon educator who has taught in this course, will teach again, but is not teaching directly this term. He was convinced that he should go there, and he had a terrible time, so he took the exponential med course, and he came back very cynical and very down about the whole process. But in fact, Jonathan White's lectures, as I said last time, are very interesting because if you look at the Gartner hype curve, he's been on every single one of those points. And so he really, his first lecture in this course was extremely enthusiastic about all things tech. So then there's Ray Kurzweil. Now, I've been in his presence lots of times. We've met, we've shaken hands. I was eating chips. My hand was covered with all this sharp chip dust. I apologize for that. And he noticed that although this was the premiere for his movie, I was the only one wearing a tux. So I did get credit for being the only one properly dressed, but I'm not sure I felt I was the only one properly dressed. Since I was, but anyway, so Ray Kurzweil is a very famous person in the area of the subject matter of this course, but he is accessible. If you write to him, he'll write back. And if you're critical of him, you'll be surprised because he's sort of reacting still since 1998 to criticisms of his published work. That's the main thing that he does. So you think you have this like unique criticism, but he's heard this 1,000 times before, and he can give you a really informative reply because most of his subsequent books have been based on answering critics of his earlier books. So that, and he's not a rigid, narrow person. He knows some of the counter arguments against his stuff much better than you do. And it's kind of cool from that point of view. Okay, so from this point onward, these are Marcus Hutter's slides, but not his colors. His colors are sort of somber, so I brightened up the colors, but these are his slides. And it gets to a sort of point of deep depression in about 12 minutes here, but anyway, then I'm going to bring you back out and we're going to talk about fun, fluffy stuff toward the end. So, where did the singularity begin? In 1847, R. Thornton, the editor of a publication you probably haven't heard of before, the expounder of primitive Christianity, wrote about the recent invention of the four-function mechanical calculator, such machines by which the scholar may, by turning a crank, grind out the solution to a problem without the fatigue of mental application, would, by its introduction into schools, do incalculable damage, injury. But who knows that such machines, when brought to greater perfection, may not think of a plan to remedy all their own defects and grind out ideas beyond the ken of mortal mind. So that's sort of similar to the idea of self-improving machines in the technological Singularity, and that's from 1847. And in 1863, 4 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, Samuel Butler published a letter captioned "Darwin Among the Machines," compares human evolution, machine evolution, prophesizing, half in just that machines will eventually replace man in the supremacy of the earth. In the course of ages, we shall find ourselves the inferior race. The letter raises many of the themes now being debated by proponents of the technological singularity. And in Erewhon, which you will quickly recognize as nowhere spelled backwards, Butler argues that there is no security against the ultimate development of mechanical consciousness. The fact of machines possessing very little in consciousness now, a mollusk has not much consciousness, reflect upon the extraordinary advances which machines have made during the last few hundred years, and note how slowly the animal and vegetable kingdoms are advancing. The more highly organized machines are creatures not so much of yesterday as of the last 5 minutes, so to speak, in comparison with past time. So the idea of machines getting ahead of us was then already around. So you've had the opportunity to hear about Marcus Hutter last time, and have his audio that goes with these slides. So these are some of the famous philosophers and writers who first had the idea of the technological singularity. They include Stanislaw Ulam and I.J. Good and Ray Solomonoff and Victor Vinge, still writing science fiction now. And Ray Kurzweil popularized the idea very much. And there was the Singularity Summit, Singularity Institute. Those used to be separate entities, as I pointed out last time, and then the Singularity bought them all up, so now the Singularity University owns those other entities. Okay, and then there's Moore's Law, the exponential increase in price performance computing. Superintelligence by Moore's Law. Moore's Law computation doubles every 1.5 years, now valid for 50 years. As long as there is a demand for more computation, Moore's Law could continue to hold for many more decades before computronium is reached. All right, now listen up. Computronium is going to be on the exam. It is something you probably don't know what it means now, but by having taken this course, you should. It's like turning the whole world into computerized data. That's what computronium is, where everything becomes computerized. And so in 20, 30 years, the raw computing power of a single computer will reach 1,015, 1,016 flops, and that's the same as the computational capacity of the human brain. So some conjecture the software will not lie far behind, and so we'll have human-level AI in 20 to 30 years or less. And these are some other ways to think about exponential change, accelerating evolution. Is the singularity negotiable? Hutter argues that it's not really negotiable. We are going toward it. We probably cannot interrupt that progress. It's sort of similar to getting close to a black hole where in theory you could get away, but really you get sucked into the black hole because you don't have the power to do anything else. Okay, so this slide is one of the most controversial slides. And as I told you last time, Marcus Hutter just gave up on the phone trying to explain this to me. I told him the students had trouble understanding it, and he just basically concluded we were all idiots up here in Edmonton. But the idea, as I understand it, is that you think the more information you have, the better off you are, but a library of all books would have zero useful information. So all books would include misprinted books, books with errors, so on. So if you put all that together, it's also too large a collection to index in any way. So you couldn't find things, and so this is the idea of the Library of Babel, that you can have so much information that the information value is zero. And if you have a hard time understanding that, so do many people, but it's kind of intriguing. And when Jonathan Schaefer, former Dean of Science, says that this slide set I'm presenting to you is incredibly difficult, this is one of the slides that he's talking about. So Jonathan Schaefer also had a hard time wrapping his head around this. Maybe a society of increasing intelligence will be increasingly indistinguishable from noise when viewed from the outside. And anyway, outsiders cannot witness a true intelligence singularity. If you're not going through it, but you're watching a group of people who are, you will not be able to comprehend what's going on. And it's unclear exactly where the intelligence explosion would be, whether it be external, internal, within us, or whatever. Historically, mankind has always been outward exploring, but that doesn't mean that a lot of the action here would not take place inside us, or augmentation inside us. Strict intelligence singularity neither experienced by insiders nor the outsiders. The insiders, if everything else is speeded up, you don't really notice it. Your brain is working faster, but so is everybody else's, and time passes differently and so on. And it can't really be understood from the outside either. And then Marcus Hutter thinks he has a better handle on what intelligence is. So in a lot of his writings, he lists all the other people who gave definitions, and then at the end, there's Legg and Hutter from 2007. So he points out that there are lots of ways to look at intelligence. It is not just reproductive capacity, because a lot of biological beings that reproduce very well are not very intelligent. And humans, actually, intelligence is actually negatively correlated with the number of children. So what activities are intelligent? What activities does evolution select for? Self-preservation, self-replication, spreading, colonizing the universe. What should we be aiming toward? Intelligence is not exactly in equal rationality, does not exactly equal reasoning toward a goal. But the more flexible notion, expected utility maximization and cumulative lifetime reward maximization. Goal-oriented behavior often appears to be at odds with long-term pleasure maximization. Still, the evolving biological goals and desire to survive, procreate, parent, dominate, and spread are seldom disowned. So who sets the goals for what superintelligence will do and how? Anyway, ultimately we will lose control no matter what we try to set up, because the entities we're trying to control are much smarter than we are, so obviously they will not remain under our control. The AGIs themselves will build further AGIs. Some aspects of this might be independent of initial goal structure. So the evolving goals process assume that the initial virtual world is a society of cooperating and competing agents. There will be competition over limited computational resources. Those virtuals who have the goal to acquire them will naturally be more successful in this endeavor compared to those with different goals. The successful virtuals will spread, the others will perish. And soon society will consist mainly of virtuals whose goals is to compete over resources. Hostility will only be limited if this is the virtual's best interest. Isn't that a scary statement? For instance, current society has replaced war mostly by economic competition, since modern weaponry makes wars a loss for both sides, while economic competition in most cases benefits at least the better. So the goal would be to survive and spread. Whatever amount of resources are available be quickly used up, become scarce. So in any world inhabited by multiple individuals, evolutionary or economic-like forces will breed virtuals with the goal to acquire as much resources as possible. Virtuals will, quote, like to fight over resources, and winners will, quote, enjoy it, while the losers will hate it. In such evolutionary voids, virtual worlds, the ability to survive and replicate is the key trait of intelligence. But this is not a sufficient characterization of intelligence. Bacteria are quite successful in this endeavor, but are not intelligent. So there probably will be alternative societies, global cooperation with no hostile competition, but that would likely require a single virtual world government and to give up individual privacy and to severely limit individual freedom, like anthills or beehives, or requires a societal setup only produce conforming individuals, may be possible by severely limiting individuals' creativity. Monistic virtual worlds, such as well-regulated societies, might better be viewed as a single organism or collective mind. Maybe the virtual world is inhabited from the outset by a single individual. Both virtual worlds could look very different and more peaceful or dystopian than the traditional ones created by evolution. Intelligence would be defined quite differently in such virtual worlds. The adaptiveness of intelligence is important. Another important aspect, how flexible or adaptive the individual is. Deep Blue might be the best chess player on Earth, but is unable to do anything else. On the contrary, higher animals and humans, remarkably broad capabilities, perform well in a wide range of environments. So intelligence is the ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. So it says Legg and Hutter in 2007. An informal definition implicitly captures most, if not all, of rational intelligence, such as reasoning, creativity, generalization, pattern recognition, problem solving, memorization, planning, learning, self-preservation, and many others. Has been rigorously formalized in mathematical terms. Properties is a non-anthropomorphic, wide-ranging, general, unbiased, fundamental, objective, complete, and universal. It is the most comprehensive formal definition of intelligence so far, I guess. Copying and modifying virtual structures. You can imagine that we're talking about things we value very much, approaching a value of practically zero. Copying virtual structures should be as cheap and effortless as it is for software and data today. The only cost of developing such structures in the first place, memory to store them, and computation to run them. Cheap manipulation and experimentation, copy of virtual life itself is possible. Copying and modifying virtual life, virtual explosion of life becomes much more diverse. In addition, virtual lives can be simulated at different speeds with speeders experiencing different societal progress than laggards, and designed intelligences will fill economic niches. Designed intelligences will, our current society already relies on specialists, and so it's natural to go to the next step to ease this process by designing our descendants, design our babies. The value of life, another consequence should be that life becomes less valuable. Our society values life since life is a valuable commodity, expensive, laborious to replace, produce, raise. We value our own life since evolution selects only organisms that value our life. Our human moral code mainly mimics this with cultural differences and some excesses. If life becomes cheap, motivation to value it will decline. Abundance lowers value. Analogies, cheap machines decrease the value of physical labor. Some expert knowledge was replaced by handwritten documents and unprinted books, and finally electronic files. Each transition reduced the value of the same information. Digital computers made human computers, people who computed for a living, obsolete. And in games, we value our own virtual life and that of our opponents less than real life, because games can be reset and one can be resurrected. So the consequences of cheap life: governments will stop paying my salary when they get the same research output from a digital version of me, essentially for free. And why not take the most extreme risks? Why not participate in dangerous fun activity if the worst case is I have to activate and backup copy myself from yesterday if something goes wrong? Just missing out on this one already not very well going day. And the belief in immortality can alter behavior drastically. So the value of virtual life, countless implications: ethical, political, economical, medical, cultural, humanitarian, religious, and art, warfare, etc. Much of our society is driven by the fact that we highly value human individual life. Virtual life becomes cheap, our drives will ultimately vanish and be replaced by other goals. If AIs can be easily created, the value of an intelligent individual will be much lower than the value of human life today. So little value assigned to individual life, maybe it becomes disposable. Are there universal values? Are there any universal values or qualities we want to see or that should survive? What do we mean by we? All humans or dominant species or government at the time? The question is asked. Could it be diversity that's important, or friendly AI? Could long-term survival of at least one conscious species that appreciates its surrounding universe be a universal value? Okay, so that's the end of the Marcus Hutter thing. And now I know you're deeply depressed. But anyway, I don't like doing it 40 minutes. So now I'm going to try to raise your spirits by talking about other stuff. So in the winter semester, we celebrate Future Day on March 1st. And we haven't really decided what to celebrate in the fall, although we kind of alternate between longevity and diversity. And I'm going to talk more about longevity this time because of the fact that there are recent things happening there. So if you look at male and female longevity in Canada, so for females, longevity has plateaued. For males, it's actually slightly decreasing now. So I mean, isn't that scary? And I think it's sort of young people's issues, or or issues that include young people, that is leading to this decreased life expectancy. That is happening for the first time. You see that curve has never gone down until now, right? So it's not just one thing. It's not just the opioid epidemic. It's childhood obesity. It's lots of stuff. But it's kind of shocking. And to me, it makes one think that we all have a stake in doing something about this. But I don't know if any of you feel strongly enough about that you would want to engage with the startling fact that while all other first world countries have longevity organizations, Canada doesn't. And so Canada is sort of looking for a longevity leader, and I think it can't be just an old person. That would never work. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, if you're interested in doing something, you could do it like really soon, by this Sunday, because WHO has identified the next decade, 2020 to 2030, as the decade of healthy aging. They're putting a lot of resources into that, and they have a comment period that ends this Sunday, the 8th, where they want to hear from people who are interested in that. And if any of you wanted to contribute to that discussion or send me some ideas about it or something, but you do not have to, okay? Because it could be that in ways I don't understand, there's something un-Canadian about an interest in longevity, and that's the reason why Canada doesn't have any longevity organization. Maybe that's true. And I just don't have complete understanding. So let me go on and tell you a bit about Future Day. And probably this is the opposite of what you think I'm going to say. And I'm all about exponential change and things getting bigger very fast. But Future Day is the opposite of that. We first celebrated it in 2012. And Edmonton is one of 16 cities in the world celebrating Future Day that year. And you might say, well, gee, probably now there are hundreds. No, but it went the other way. So with every succeeding year, there are fewer and fewer cities celebrating Future Day. And so we have the idea, I very much like the external appearance and the internal spaces of the art gallery, and we have an idea of doing something big. There used to be a Paris salon where all these famous intellectuals would get together and talk to each other, and the idea, that this could happen in Edmonton and so on. Yeah, but anyway, but it's not as if this is an idea that is growing. As a matter of fact, at the moment, it seems to be mainly Sydney, Australia, and Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Those are the two places currently celebrating Future Day. So that's another thing. You can make a moral decision. Can we let Future Day die, or is it any big deal, or are you going to be part of making it grow again and interesting people in other cities? So we've done things, let's see here. Yeah, so I talked last time about the Big Bang Theory and so on. So you would need to have something sort of multifaceted. If it's going to be a real new holiday, it needs to have like special cultural and ceremonial things and special visuals and sounds and all sorts of things. So you can imagine like the Holi festival in the Asian subcontinent where people sprinkle pigments. This began with pigments from plants, which are all very healthy and so on, but many of the brightly colored pigments from plants are exceedingly rare, so hard to find, whereas paints of the same color, which are highly toxic, are easy to find, and so it's become a rather hazardous pastime, but it does bring people together in the sense that at other times of the year, people who would never talk to each other because they're in whole different sectors of society do interact in these ceremonies. Maybe that interests you, maybe not. And then there's this Crayola Bomb poem, which has a similar spirit about crayons coming down from the sky, and the Roomba, robotic vacuum cleaner. If you do a time lapse of that, it's kind of pretty. And then hot air balloons can give you a similar appearance. It's kind of costly to create your own hot air balloon festival. Well, anyway, maybe. I have never really had anybody add to these ideas. I mean, these were obviously my ideas about what it would take to get people enthusiastic about this. And there would need to be like poetry and songs. I thought maybe the windmill of your mind would be cool. Round, like the circle, a spiral, like wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning. Ever spinning a reel like a snowball on a mountain or carnival balloon. Carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes in its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space like the circle you can find in the windmills of your mind. Now you may know that 2014, the LED lights on the high-level bridge came to be a thing, and you could make a request to the city that they light the bridge in certain ways for your organization. As you drove toward the bridge, there would be a sign indicating which organization had sponsored the lights, and you could sort of figure it out. And you would think there was a lot of competition for this, but there actually isn't. It's remarkably easy because everybody seems to kind of lost interest. So if you want to have the high-level bridge lit in a certain color in honor of something that you're doing, it's quite easy to do that. So that's what we did in 2015. And our colors were orange and green, which are the same as the colors in the Edmonton Journal article about this course. And if you come to the house someday, you can see those two robot cutouts that are indeed just beside my desk there. And so this is the next to the last slide, and I'll allow you to guess what the last slide is going to be. When you see, you'll say, oh yeah, I could have figured it out. But anyway, the next to last slide, your suggestions are greatly welcome. How can we capture the imagination of the public, get everybody thinking about these matters? We need to mainstream this in public view in regard to future technological singularity, to have it considered as fact, not fiction, and we need to promote organized thinking about the future in universities and beyond. And those of you taking this course, you sort of get that. We need to promote, and please talk up our Light the Bridge success, or tell me if you want to do it again. Okay, so any guesses about what's on the last slide? So remember, Marcus Hutter allowed me to use his slides, right? But he insisted on this slide. So this is the link to the stuff. And yeah, so these are the references. And he would only allow me to use the rest of the slides if I put this reference slide on. And the links work and everything. And so this is the link to his slide set, and these are some of the main ideas behind what he's talking about. Okay, so we have 30 minutes left. Yes?
I have two things to
Yeah.
say. So one's a question, one's like a suggestion for like future day. Sometimes when people get so excited about a topic and they know so much, I feel as though they don't know how to dumb things down to people who don't know much. And
Right.
since you're saying that this generation hasn't really been participating, it's because they don't know what's going on. Because whenever someone speaks about it, they start saying big words that no one really knows, and I'll be honest.
Technological singularity, what is that?
You know, like even for me, sitting in this class, it's like sometimes like in one ear, out the other, and then I have to go back and I have to figure out,
Yeah.
what is Solez saying? I don't get it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But I think the other thing is that since the beginning of time, there have been important young people who got excited about things and made things happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened, right? So I'm trying to somehow get that sort of advocacy going. And you're quite right. It could be we need a whole different lexicon for this. We need different words, different ways of presenting it. Even the reason why should we care about this? You know, maybe that needs to be explained in a different way. But it is true that modern life, you have more and more experiences that get us closer to this stuff. Like you look at the last few audio phone calls that you made, you know, probably several of them were to automated attendants. And then if you look at whether you succeeded in that call to talking to the machine and how long it took and so on. A lot of things like that work better than talking to a real human, you know. And in the beginning, that was so not so. When you got a machine voice, your heart sank because you know it would take forever and not be satisfactory. Now you feel that way about some humans because you know that if only they were a machine, you could get this done. But you know, they're just too slow and.
That brings up my second point.
Yeah.
About how I forgot their names. The people we were talking about in the 1980s. What evidence did they have that we were reaching technological singularity? Even like when the first computer was only built in like 1940 something, you know?
Right.
So like I understand how like they were talking crazy and everybody realized they were talking crazy because what evidence did they have?
Well, it's interesting. I remember when the first calculators were around and my boss, the person I was learning kidney pathology from, was quite skeptical about, you know, he thought he was pretty good at math, and so he tried some things that he could detect the calculator being wrong, and it never was. So this whole thing of having pride in skills that no one will ever need anymore, you know, I think there is also having skills that hasn't been valued in the past will obviously be needed in the future. So think about when you have no clue what's going on and pretending that you do, and providing leadership based on this simulated knowledge you don't really have. So men are really good at that, right? I mean, you know, it probably directly related to, you know, testosterone levels and stuff, and so, yeah, men are really good at that. And what I've argued is, in the future, you'll never not have the information. You'll always have the information. So this ability to fake things, it's going to be of no value. Whereas what you need to do is to work cooperatively with other people, you know, and it seems like there are a lot of sort of female natural attributes that seem like they'll be much more useful in the future than they have been in the past. I mean, if you think of some life-threatening thing in the jungle, it is valuable for you to believe that somebody there knows what's going on and what should be done. Even if that's completely wrong, it still may allow everybody to go in one direction and be saved, right? Rather than everybody just milling around. So that original kind of testosterone-related trait was probably had bona fide, you know, survival value in the savannah kind of thing, right? And mansplaining and all sorts of things. It's probably good back then. Yeah, so that's it. But if you look at my videos on my YouTube channel, so the one with the most views is about this kind of thing. So the Fermi paradox, why haven't aliens visited us, you know? I mean, there's so many potential Earth-like worlds out there, and where are they, you know? So I argued that it's because most societies have a sort of aggressive, you know, approach to things and probably kill each other off at some point before they get to exploring the universe. And the cool thing about that, it just shows that life is fair. You may sometimes question that, but the number of thumbs down on that video is much higher than thumbs up. It's the only video I have with many more thumbs down than thumbs up. And it's frustrating because it's the one that's more watched. But don't you think every guy who watches it clicks the thumbs down? So, but anyway, yeah, so I think that what I have felt about the course, and I'm trying to make this be true, is that we don't just sit around and talk about things, but we could actually like move things forward, or we could create skills that would allow things to happen that wouldn't otherwise happen, to kind of move the needle just a little bit toward a positive outcome for the human race. And so that's kind of what keeps me teaching the courses, the idea that we could do that. Not necessarily me, but like one of you. Yes?
I think going back to what Amna was saying about what evidence did those people have, because reading through...
Could you point the camera at her so this is not just like completely wasted? Who was that? Disembodied voice.
Yeah, so reading through Hutter's slides, I think there are a lot of things that are fair to say and maybe predict or theorize, except I think the reason why the general public and maybe, you know, concerning future day and young people, the reason why people think this is kind of outlandish is because there's no concrete event or things, because I don't think most people would think of the invention of the calculator as something as terrifying as AI is taking over our entire lives.
Right.
Even though I guess in principle it's kind of the...
Directly related, no. I
It, no,
for a very long period of time.
But it's, I think in our modern lives we've integrated things like automated answering machines, calculators and stuff, smartphones, but I think the general public still recognizes that humans are still very much in control of a lot of society. So
yeah.
So maybe this idea that AI is going to take over everything just seems too far in the future for people to care.
Yeah, but you know, now, let me tell you a story. You can see Google Hangout that I participated in about how technology can kind of save the world, sort of thing. And it's not that they tried to make it all men, but it was all men. Apparently they tried to, but whatever, it was all men. It happened to be, you may know that, you know, the Me Too movement started differently at various times, but it excluded medicine in the beginning. No one was talking about Me Too in medicine. It just wasn't a thing. And at a certain time, just before this Google Hangout thing that I did about human flourishing, so there began to be stories, very convincing stories, that made you think that there is a Me Too problem in medicine. So those stories were from the US. So I posted one of them on my Facebook wall one night the week prior to this Google Hangout. And I went to bed. And the next morning I got up and my Facebook wall, I could see it, but I could not post to it. It's just some unseen, and there's no message. It's not like I got a message saying you violated community standards or something. It was just that I couldn't post to my own wall, and I tried multiple browsers, multiple computers. It was a real thing. I couldn't do it. So I thought, well, maybe let me try taking that Me Too in medicine thing down. People let me to do that. So I did that, yeah, and within 30 minutes, my wall was back to normal. Okay, so this is the first time anything, sort of this unseen force or whatever it is, Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, it directly impacted me like that. So I decided this is worthy of talking about. We're talking about human flourishing. This must have something to do with it. And so, you know how Google Hangout works. You can see the faces of all the people taking part. So I'm talking about this, and the other men, I'm frozen. They're all complicit, you know. They're all scared. It's just, yeah. So there are things like that make you realize that this is not just the future that we're talking about, that there, it certainly affects the future, but some of it is tangible and real right now, and I mean that. So that Google Hangout thing, human flourishing, the London futurists were the sponsor of that. It's a fairly highly watched video, and it is really, really interesting. So I felt at the moment, maybe I'm ahead of things, maybe I have made a procedural error by mentioning this, But the next day, that weekend, on CBC Radio 1 and Radio 2, it was the big news. So, okay, I guess I'm not ahead, or I'm just one day ahead. Yeah, so, yes. Yeah.
Just to speculate a bit on your question, what made people in the 80s, based on what evidence, think about things like the singularity?
Yeah.
It's a great question, and I think it says a lot of things about the nature of evidence. That ideas don't necessarily start as a response to evidence that people see. Sometimes the idea exists in advance, and that leads them to look for evidence that supports that. But I would say that in the 80s, people were starting to see what was happening with computing. So I think they've always had the question, where are we going with all of this? And And so I think when they drew the curve about how fast things were getting better, and you just think exponentially, it's logical to think, well, a few more doublings of this, and what's gonna happen. But I'd say it's also a product of culture. So you think the 80s, Star Wars, the famous science fiction of the 70s, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and all of these people speculating about what the computers might become. So I think it's just a natural cultural outgrowth to start fearing it. I think The Matrix and those types of, I guess, more
But
recent
I
movies.
was talking about the time, like the 1800s. The computer wasn't even
Oh, sorry,
invented.
the 1800s.
Yeah.
I thought
There
you were
was-
talking about the 80s.
No, that's
But-
fine. That's okay.
No, but even still, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
A guy sees a calculator and says, oh my God, this is gonna be the death of the human brain. So I'd say what it is it establishes a pattern, when and if, will technology ever replace us, and how might that happen? When we see all sorts of sort of false alarms, they were concerned about the computer, or the calculator, it didn't turn out to be a problem. They were concerned about other things, it didn't turn out to be a problem. So you can surmise that that will be an argument in the future. None of these things in the past have realized the fears, but you'll still say, well, maybe the technology has gotten a little bit different. But you're right, I think the people in the 1800s thinking that this is the end of the human brain may well have been well ahead of their time. It wasn't evidence though, it was speculation.
Yeah, do you wanna grab hold of that so we can capture, yes?
So I think I could be very far off on this front, but I think as well the idea in terms of future day and why so many people aren't necessarily entirely getting involved. I think people are a little bit scared of AI because they do see that it's taking their jobs and it's doing a lot of the tasks that the human brain could originally do. But I think the fact that we still haven't found a way to make AI replicate human emotions and be almost a sentient being in and of itself, I think that's kind of why people aren't necessarily as scared. We expect that AI will take over, for example, accounting positions. We know that that's going to happen, but to think that AI might one day be completely transformed to be a human being and have those emotions and stuff, I don't think that that's necessarily clicked in people's minds yet. So that could also be a reason why people aren't so concerned about things like future day and aren't getting as involved, is because that fear of having that hasn't entirely sunk in. Not that it's not possible in the future, but I think it just hasn't necessarily
Right.
clicked for people right now.
Some of it's optimism, pessimism, right? If you're a pessimistic person, one way to look at the world very simply is you have more here and now challenges than you can possibly cope with. So your life's not very good because you're constantly stressed by more stuff than you can handle. So why arbitrarily choose to think about, the next 15 to 30 years when you've got stuff happening now that's hard to cope with? On the other hand, if you're an optimist, then I think, it makes it possible you feel sort of invested in the future of the world, other people's future, how this is going to work for all of us, that kind of thing. You feel the kind of, capacity to think those thoughts. So some of it, yeah, but then there are things that happen every day that influence your pessimism, optimism. It isn't a fixed thing, right? I mean, some days you're much more optimistic or pessimistic. Yeah.
I just want to echo that in another way, saying that what you mentioned in that, so there were no evidence, and I kind of agree. But if you think about it, this is how it was shaped, right? So it's all. I think it's the way I want to shape it out is that it's all in the fears and the aspirations of human beings. And the fact that you mentioned about the conformity bias is that if I fear that I'm not going to be a divine creature anymore, I will predict the future such that whatever that I'm seeing would be an evidence of that, and same as the aspirations that I would want the future so that it's that I'm not the only divine, and then the AI will blow up.
And like after I asked my question, I realized that like everything in this world kind of starts with like an obscure comment, and then we move on from that. Like even like just the human genome, like we sequenced it and it happened a lot earlier than it was intended to like happen, but sometimes we overshoot and sometimes we undershoot, and a little part of me is thinking that we like kind of like undershooted when this AI thing is going to happen. And yeah, so
Well, the question of what now is ever present. You know,
Yeah.
what, you know, and what now. Couldn't agree more about the Genome Project. You know, I was an enthusiastic student in the 90s, and I believed the promises that we're going to solve the genome and human diseases are going to start falling one by one. You know, and so for 20 years, seeing that that didn't happen, I think has made me moderate my expectations. And so while I might discuss with Dr. Solez when this will all happen, you know, you'll learn more about me. I'm not quite as optimistic that this is happening in the coming years or decades, but certainly possible beyond that. But you know, hopefully, I think it is important to understand the history. How do these ideas germinate? How do they capture people? And maybe when you think about that, we'll know how to sell it with Future Day or Longevity Day in a way that is helpful to people.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to get you to all think the same. Like last term, there was one guy who wanted to do all the party stuff and none of the other students did. And I was fine with that. I mean, we couldn't do it if it's just one student, but it's not. So like the heterogeneity of your ideas adds value to the overall, you know, discussion that we're not trying to every teaching session to come to one unified you know, decision on all these very, very complicated problems. But yet discussing them gets us somewhere. And like if you look at Simon Wu's presentation from last term, there was a moment in a discussion like this when I talked about the fact that smell and sight are quantum and you can't explain them any other way. And I realized for that moment, that's what he's going to do his project on. And that was right. And it was very, you know, productive. It was better than what the people teaching the course were able to do in that area, which was really something. So that's the kind of thing that can happen here. In these, you know, discussions, you can get a really good idea that you want to pursue, even if we don't know really all the answers at the moment. So other thoughts? We still have 8 minutes. Anyway. No, so I should explain about the student videographers. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it's a self-organizing system to some extent. So like last term, we had like the main videographer and somebody taking over. We had too many videographers. And this term, we have 2 people who can come on Tuesday. We haven't yet found somebody who can come on Thursday. I'm sure there will be somebody. But that's the reason there's no videographer today. So I'm sorry about that. It's yeah, anyway. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question regarding the persistence of Moore's law in the future.
Right.
So on the slides it said that human level AI should be attainable in 20 to 30 some years.
Right.
But I feel as though, you know, like relating back to a lot of what we've already discussed about in this class, a lot of people have fear and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding this, to the point where people question the ethics of whether we should. And I feel as though even if it is possibly attainable, I feel as though it'll always just be pushed back just a little bit because of the human limitations, human limitations that are present, and that we all always want to try to control something.
Yeah, no, that's all correct, but we don't have the power really to keep it from happening, because probably a breakthrough in one area where there is nobody preventing that kind of progress will then end up, affecting us all, or other people learn how to do that and so on. It's really not possible. And the thing that's kind of cool is all the books that talk about stopping, like there's a book, Enough, and so on, right? And if you look at the careers of those people, they enjoy the sales of the book, but they are not acting like they believe what's in their own book. So they know that it's not possible to stop, even though they're sort of advocating in the book. Yes.
I think technologically it's very possible to reach that stage, but I think that's also why we have regulations and why we have like structures like governments that are meant to sort of regulate and control the expansion of such projects. So for example, like there's like genetic engineering and a lot of these things that are already available to humanity, but a lot of structures that are in place kind of restrict how much that can be used. So I think even though technologically we are very well on the way to actually reach that point, I'm a little bit hesitant as to whether or not that will actually be fully adopted, because I think there are ways to kind of hinder its progress in society or its implementation, kind of.
Yeah. But the other thing is, do you think government is the best entity to necessarily make these decisions? In the past, you probably would have thought that. It's just, the evidence isn't quite so good today. Yes.
Instead of just government and people that control it, could also be the price as well. Like the price of development itself could limit how many are created, or how much their production is, and how expansive it could be. So that could be one limiting factor, instead of just people limiting how much they're able to do.
Yeah, no, that is.
But who's to say that there isn't someone in their basement coming up and doing all these random things, Like, we don't know what's happening outside of this media world, People just come out of nowhere with, discoveries.
But with Moore's law, the power of computation for now lies with these big entities that we cannot achieve in our garage anymore. I mean, at one point there was that possibility, but I'm talking about, of course, this limited aspect of AI and that space of genome and editing and all that I wouldn't know about, but that possibility of the computation. And one thing that I would add here is that maybe the way we should think about it, and this is very biased, is that not to stop progress, whereas again, as these discussions, it's very sort of fruitful in thinking about, okay, how we can hinder it, how we can move it such that it's ethical. And then the question would be, okay, if there's an entity of human level intelligence, and as by definition it will have ethical values of its own, so it's another entity, right? And these entities usually learn, right, from their atmosphere, their environment. So whose ethics are we implementing in that, or who are we? Is it government? Again, bias, I wouldn't like that. But when we talk about autonomous vehicles, there's a very big issue when it sort of connects both of things, where it's about computational powers that lies within these big entities, and again, the ethics. So if you put these together, okay, the ethical things that's going to be implemented would be dictated sort of by the ones who have the power, the computation. So it will be industry, and I don't know if it's good or bad.
There's always the question of, government doesn't seem like the best one, but if not them, who? So, I'll leave you with that, and contemplating living in the least worst scenario as the
So,
best
you know,
we can do.
with many things that become exciting recently, they had a long, flat part of the curve where there wasn't very much happening. And it was government supporting them then. And then when, you know, the acceleration started, then all sorts of other entities supported them. So, you know, the Human Genome Project seemed to begin very slowly and so on. And it was government supported. Yeah, so but I don't know if the government of the past and the government of the present are necessarily absolutely equivalent. Yeah. Okay, it's 3:20. Thank you all very much.